The very busy Rob Packard and I didn't have a chance to come up with a title for today's. Hey, Mark. Didn't have a chance to come up with a title for today, so it's just the broad-reaching Rob Packard presents. He can present anything he wants, and he has a devoted following who will just listen to anything he has to say, and I am among those people. So, Rob, what do you have to say?
I thought I'd start out with a question.
All right.
I do have a direction I'm going to head, but I thought I'd start out with a question. How many people have done a submission on the new eSTAR? So let's start with that. Anybody done an eSTAR?
Aaron Deep, Jorg. That's it so far? Anyone in the attendees who? No.
Okay.
Sean Smith
So
has joined us.
has anybody even looked at version 5.0? So we got So version 5.0 is the latest version. You're required to use it as of February 4th, but up until then, you could still use version 4.3, which is the one that is current. The reason why I ask is because the cybersecurity section, they didn't really make a big deal about any changes to cybersecurity in the FDA's release, but the section is multiple pages long. And if you read between the lines, I think most companies are going to find they have some redesign that they might need to do in order to get it through the FDA's gauntlet for cybersecurity now if they have a medical device that has software and wireless functionality. And I think that's a fairly big deal for a lot of companies. And the procedures that are out there, they're just not up to that level of requirements. So I was curious as to anybody's even taken a look at that. This group's fairly well connected and fairly current on the standards, but I don't think a lot of manufacturers, they're sort of off in their cave building their product, and they'll come out when it's ready. And my fear is that when they come out, the world will be so different that they won't be ready anymore. Andre, what did you have to say about that?
Yeah, Rob, we were looking at it because we have a device that we're developing right now. It's a therapy device, which has a cellular modem connection. So obviously we're concerned about it. It does look like we're going to have to do a number of code changes. I'll be candid with you, Rob. I didn't read all the pages that were there. I kind of stopped halfway through and realized that we had some work to do. So we're in the process now of trying to address that. My software people are looking through it and seeing what we can or can't do.
Okay, so Andre is the poster child of this is how you're supposed to be doing this. The new stuff comes out, you read it, you realize you got more work to do, and your team gets together and says, where do we have problems that we have to potentially fix some coding that doesn't meet the requirements? Other companies, they get to the submission, they submit it to the FDA, they wait 60 days and they get back a list of all the deficiencies, and they think they're going to fix it in 180 days. And that's just not going to happen because you'll have to recode and redo all your testing. And that's not a small deal. And the other solution people have is, well, we just won't have wireless function. Why would anybody want Bluetooth anything? We'll have it be all self-contained in its own little bubble. And we'll add Wi-Fi later. We'll add Bluetooth later. And there's nobody in the world that really wants something that doesn't have wireless connectivity now. In fact, everybody wants everything to work with their phone 24/7. So why can't you make it work? Well, because I don't want to fill out the paperwork for the FDA is the answer. So I thought I'd try sharing my screen here to show you how this is the best we've got, unfortunately. This is of course, a copywritten guidance here. But this standard is the ANSI/AAMI IEC TIR 8001-1, or sorry, 8002-1, that tells you how to apply risk management to software. And I hope I'm sharing the right screen. Yeah, I'm sharing the right screen. And I don't know if anybody's ever seen this before, but I did a search for the word security. And this is about risk management of software. The word security only shows up 6 times in the whole document. And there are only 3 items that they come up with. And that's not going to cut it. And this is the guidance document we're supposed to work with to tell us what the risks are. they're giving us examples of software risks related to security, and they only have 3. So that might be part of the reason why people are struggling is this is the best source we've got for identifying risks for software. Now, if you happen to have TIR 57, there's a lot more in there because that whole entire document is related to cybersecurity. But this is where people go to come up with their software requirements spec. So when they write when they say, you know, this is my wish list of all the things my software should do, they're supposed to make a numbered list of all their software requirements. And when they get to the security category, there's 3 items on this list. And they may say, you know, only 2 of these even apply to me, or only 1 of them applies to me. But that's not going to cut it. And so in order to comply with what the FDA wants, if you haven't started your project yet, or you're in the middle of it and there's still time to fix things, what you really should be doing. Now, this is the cybersecurity section for the FDA now. You know, the software section is up here. It's just this little bit here that we used to think was a lot of work. But now the cybersecurity section that used to be 2 lines is now page 1, page 2, 2.5 pages. So it used to be less than this little bit here. Now it's 2.5 pages. And I'll just pick one area, cybersecurity controls. So we're supposed to have a document that identifies risks, your hazard analysis, and then we're supposed to have a document that is the software requirements spec that identifies all the requirements to address those hazards. And each one of those requirements would be a risk control. The FDA is saying, please tell us what page number of your document we can find these 8 risk controls. None of those are listed in this other document that I showed. Those aren't listed here. Where did this come from? So the FDA is saying, not just tell us what risk controls you have, but tell us what page of your document we can find these 8 of them. And if you go to this little help feature over here, it tells you what each one is and why you should have it. And tells you, here's a little hyperlink, go to our guidance document and read about it. So if people are like, I don't know how to do this, this is exactly how you do it. When you create your software requirement specs, you need to go through A, B, C, D through H and make sure every single one of those requirements is in your software requirements. That's how you do it. And so you could do that by training. You could put it in your procedure. Your software requirements shall have at least the minimum of these software controls for security. Or you could have it in your template for your SRS, your software requirement spec. You could have these 8 already listed in your template. Any one of those 3 would work. But this is all brand new stuff that the FDA is the only one requiring it right now.
Mark, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, it was a mistake. Sorry.
Oh, I thought maybe you were also just getting the lights back on.
Yeah, that's probably
Sean
true.
Smith, you wrote me privately that you're working with a cybersecurity client right now. What kind of work are they doing?
Threat analysis. They are a full stack Israeli startup funded, and they have a product that works for detecting cloud-based threats, and they're doing they're trying to look at medtech. I'm helping them look at medtech and saying, is this an audience worth pursuing for them? And I would like some feedback on that. I don't know if there's any appetite for this. What the conversation is suggesting here is that companies are going to find themselves ill-prepared for the new eSTAR application, and that a cybersecurity company would do well to tailor their services to that audience. That's all I'm saying.
And I think it goes one step further on the cybersecurity company. Most of the cybersecurity companies only do the remediation and the testing and the monitoring. So they'll have an automated monitoring system that will look for vulnerabilities. just sort of like your malware version, but for the actual code. They're looking for vulnerabilities in your code. And then once they've identified vulnerabilities, they'll give you a list and you need to go back and change your code to shore up those vulnerabilities. And then the second part of it would be more of a manual process. And that's what they call pen testing, where they'll have a team of hackers that are the white hat good guys that are trying to hack into your software, looking for those kinds of vulnerabilities that a lot of companies have because they have poor coding practices. So they'll hack into the software and they'll give you a report. Here's what we found during pen testing. And then your company has a list of vulnerabilities and you have to address each one of those vulnerabilities by patching your code and updating it. So the FDA is requiring that you design your software for patchability and updatability. And that's item H down here, firmware and software updates, capable of being updated in a secure and timely manner. Not, we will update it, but we don't have a date yet. You need to design your software so that's easily done. And some companies don't even know how they're going to update their software, but now it's part of the requirements. But the
Eric?
cybersecurity testing firms, they don't actually create this documentation and they don't guide the companies on how to write their software. They just tell them what's wrong with it. So it's sort of like, I do auditing, but I don't do quality systems. I'll tell you what's wrong with it, but I can't help you. That's what a certification body does. They tell you, here's your audit report. Here's all the things you got to fix, but I can't help you with fixing them. You got to do that yourself. That's essentially what the cybersecurity testing firms are doing. They're telling you what's wrong, but they're not giving you any help. So what I'm trying to do is coach my clients, go to the actual submission document you're going to be submitting and make sure all of these 8 items are included in your requirements when you write your software up front. So it's sort of your scoping list. When you have that statement of work with your software developer, you say it has to have these things. Why? Because I got to tell them what page it's found on.
Barry?
Yeah, Rob, I think there's a number of companies out there now that are actually developing kind of a 3-tiered platform. And the first tier of that platform is to help clients work through as they actually design their devices, identifying their software bill of materials and all of the components that are in it, then doing the penetration testing, and then doing, the second tier would be that penetration testing, and then doing that ongoing monitoring. So there's a number of companies out there that I've come across as a result of some work I'm doing with a venture studio, and looking at competitors to a potential client that they're looking to invest in. But that's essentially trying to create a complete platform across this new requirement is out there in a number of different groups. A public company the company that's out there is MedCrypt, if you know of them, and they have significant investments from Intuitive Ventures, J&J Ventures, and Dexcom. And they have this 3-tiered platform along with others that are out there. BlackBerry has developed something similar. So just thought I'd put that out there.
Mike is a Wharton alum and a 2-time 10Xer, the CEO of MedCrypt. He came last year. So if you need an introduction, I can facilitate that.
Appreciate that.
What I see with most companies is they're aware of the very large companies like MedCrypt that can do that. They don't have the right number of zeros in their pocketbook to afford them. And the companies that are smaller, that are trying to help out, that are more in the budget range, they haven't got a clue. And then in-house, companies that are developing their software in-house, they also don't have a clue. There's just not a lot of training available out there on how to do this for medical devices. So what you get is people from other industries coming to the medical device industry and say, yeah, I know how to code, I can help you, but they don't know how to do the documentation for it. And I think other industries have already gone through this, but they didn't have to document it. So they know how to write for security, but they didn't have to document it in this way. So it's new to everybody because the documentation requirements are new.
Michelle, you had a question that you typed out, but share with the class.
Okay, so does that cybersecurity requirement only apply to medical device that have wireless capability, or all the medical device, as long as you have software in there, will be included?
If you have a device that has no wireless connectivity and has no removable storage drive, so it doesn't have a USB or an SD card, and there's no wireless functionality, then you're not required to comply, because they're saying you don't have a cybersecurity risk because you don't have any connection to the internet. So you think about a thermometer. If a thermometer has a battery and a display, it's got firmware and software in it, maybe, but it doesn't connect to anything, so nobody can hack it.
Okay, so according to IEC 62304 software DMD, in there is two kind of software. One is software as medical device, and one is software integrated as part of the medical device. So neither of them, as long as they don't have internet connection capability, then this cybersecurity requirement is not applicable.
It's very difficult to have software as a medical device that doesn't have this risk, because
Okay.
what are you going to run that software on? You're going to run it on
That's
your mobile
true.
phone, that has a connection. You run it in the cloud, that has a connection. So
Okay.
almost all software as a medical device is affected, but software in a medical device, it depends on the connectivity of the device.
Okay, so thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, and then there's one other helpful thing. A lot of companies will say, well, I want to collect data wirelessly, but only for my clinical study, or I only want to have access to the device and programmability when I'm doing maintenance. And they actually have the permission to exclude these requirements if it's only for maintenance or it's only for clinical studies. Those are two of the criteria. But when I talk to pen testers, they say, when I have a physical device, if I can open that device up and I can put a jumper cable on it and I can program it, I'm going to say that's a way I can penetrate it. And so people will say, well, if I'm in the OR, I'm going to notice the person that's got a screwdriver out and he's not supposed to be in the OR, but this equipment could be anywhere. It could be at a distributor, it could be at a warehouse, it could be in storage, it could be a lot of different places. So it's a lower risk than something that has a wireless connection. But the FDA has said you don't have to provide documentation if it's only for maintenance purposes, or it's only for a clinical study, and you disable it when it's not in those uses. But that is still a risk. It's just not something the FDA is requiring you to document for the submission.
Have you more to share on eSTAR or cyber, or would you like to present another concept?
That was the main topic that I wanted to cover, because I've seen so many clients recently. I guess it would maybe help to put some context in it, but I would say more than half of our clients that we saw in the last 6 months were asking questions about cybersecurity.
Okay.
So that's a huge volume of questions coming just on the topic of cybersecurity that we hadn't seen for any other topic in the past.
I think I was actually dreaming this last night, because I've got 10x on the brain, about a topic for you. And that was little nuances that your clients miss, that had they consulted with you first, you would have been like, oh no, and it caused like a great big headache. So what are some things that you might not even realize, but are really going to mess you up in a submission?
Number one on the list would probably be related to aging, and when you do shelf life testing. And I just had a pre-sub yesterday with the FDA where this was discussed. Normally the companies will do the testing at the end of the shelf life period, but the FDA will come back to some of them during the review and say, you didn't do time zero. And they're like, well, that's unaged product. We did aged product. And the FDA says, we want to see both. is we want to see how much the performance deteriorated over time. And so if the company is presenting 6-month shelf life data and they saw a lot of deterioration, but it was still acceptable, the FDA is going to be a little bit concerned about the company going forward and saying, I have a 2-year, a 3-year, a 4-year, 5-year shelf life later when the 6-month data showed a deterioration that was significant. But if there's almost no deterioration detectable during the 6 months, the FDA might feel more secure about that. So the FDA is asking for time zero data, the initial unaged product data, to compare with the aged product data so they can assess, is this something I need to ask for more data on? Or is this going to be enough? I can let them go to market and do letters to file for extending their shelf life later. And so that catches a lot of companies in a lot of ways. Number one, your submission is already being reviewed. You're already sitting at the FDA, and now you have 180 days to come up with data you didn't expect to have. But also, most of these companies don't even have enough product to do the testing, so they have to make new product and retest for time zero. So if it's a sterile product, which it usually is, you make the product, you package it, you sterilize it, and then you do the performance testing all over again. And that could very easily cost you tens of thousands of dollars that you weren't planning on, and you have a very short timeline to do it in. So that's a pretty common gotcha. And so we went through the list of tests and said, these tests we think we do need to do testing on at time zero. These we don't think we need to do testing at time zero. And the FDA said that would be fine as long as you provide the justification in your plan. And we recommend you submit that to us before you spend any money. And they even said that word, like money. Before you go spending money on this, make sure you send us this plan so we can review it and give you comments on it. But we're okay with you justifying. Just do it before you do testing, not after the fact.
What needs aging testing? Like Sue, does she need it for her syringes?
Yep.
Is everything needed? I mean,
anything that's likely to age. So if we're talking about
metal, plastic?
A tongue depressor probably won't age much. It's also not a critical item. Anything metal is less likely to age. For
Plastic?
electronic devices, batteries are usually the major item that ages. So as long as you have aging data on the battery and you can replace the battery, that's not a
Susie, what
problem.
do you have that, what ingredients, if you will, elements do you have in your product, Sue, that would be subject to aging?
We're testing I'm not exactly sure. I think the needle itself has already been tested by BD because it's a BD needle. So it's mostly the frog. We're testing the whole frog, the plastic and the filter combined for a 0 and T6, which is a 6-month. Then we'll extend to 1 year, 2 years, and 3 or 5 years.
And so the theory is that the filter is made out of some kind of silicone,
Yes,
and silicone will degrade?
we're testing that to make sure that it does not degrade.
In
Do
theory,
you have experience with that material?
Well, I mean, any material can degrade. I mean, there's, there's UV exposure, there's different gases in rooms, there's all kinds of ways that things can degrade. So yeah, I can see why they would require that testing. And a filter especially, I mean, filters can degrade certainly over time.
we see
When FDA does this kind of thing, are they assuming that the place where the product is inventoried is a reasonable condition, or is it like some kind of stress test where, well, did you test it at 110 degrees? Did you test it at freezing? I mean, how crazy is it?
it's usually they put it in an incubator, usually at around 50 degrees Celsius, and they leave it there for weeks. And then they pull it out, and there's an equation they use to say that amount of time at 50 degrees simulated room temperature for this long, maybe a year or longer.
There are some issues though on testing, particularly like with what I'm working on right now with polymers. You kind of know certain materials will degrade non-linearly at accelerated, conditions. And that becomes a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, the performance of a filter, for example, can change based on it absorbed water. It absorbed moisture in the air. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could happen. So, you know, certainly could see why they would want the data.
Well, they're
You could
looking to make sure that the device doesn't degrade relative to the materials that it's contacting. In this case, for Sue, it's drugs and many different drugs. So she needs to make sure that, you know, the materials aren't degrading relative to the substances that are in contact with the plastics or silicone.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question for Sue. So like with that frog, the indications for use, is that really limited to kind of a limited number of drugs, or is it really going to be considered universal?
We're hoping that it'll be considered universal. The only, I never really thought about it. I mean, we've been using vitamin K and epinephrine as standards of practice. And I guess there could be some absorption, but we're studying, we're testing and trying to de-risk it as much as possible. So I don't know that I answered your question, but we are looking into it and we are checking other material and drugs.
But
the
that's
material,
that's a single-use product though, right? So I think it has, you know, we're talking about storage versus use. A single-use product obviously is going to have a lot of issues in the short time that it's exposed. Whereas a storage is you're having a long-term exposure to atmosphere or whatever else is in the atmosphere.
and we're using the same material that is being currently used for the BD and the B-Bron filter. We just built a better edition.
Rick, you've
With,
been patient. Mr. Stockton?
Yeah, there we go. Just had to turn on my mic. Rob, is there anything which attracts a scrutiny from the FDA unexpectedly in the ways of materials? And some of the ones I just jotted down were some of the ones we talked about. Metals, plastics, ceramics, polymer-coated ceramics. I expect they would attract more scrutiny because of the polymer. Filter performance, you guys were talking about that 5 seconds after I typed it. But also pharmaceuticals, either in pellets or coatings. And then I started thinking about scrutiny related to spring-loaded parts that are actually assembled in a compressed form. Also heat-treated metals, and the last thing I wrote down was an evaluation of structural plastic versus place-holding plastic, or just loose component plastic parts. And I'm wondering if that list inspires anything that you've seen that might attract scrutiny where we wouldn't really expect it.
The FDA doesn't really have the same level of expertise in materials that your typical materials engineer would have. They tend to apply the same tools every single time to assess whether there's a risk. And then if they see something wrong in the data, then they raise it as a concern and they put the burden on the company to figure out what the problem is, prove that that's what the problem is, and show how they've addressed it. It's not just aging, but they'll almost always ask companies to do aging the same way, when in fact, not everything ages the same way. And one of the examples that resulted in a lot of recalls and serious injuries was for anything that was a hip implant or a knee implant. I think it was specifically originally discovered with knee implants that were more than 5 years old, or right around that 5-year expiration date, and they had ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, and they had been irradiated by gamma or E-beam, and there was oxidative degradation that would accelerate towards the end of the shelf life, and when you hit about 5 years, they started to really fall apart, and they would fail in the body, not fail. They'd look fine, but when they actually tried using them in the body, they perform completely differently. So now there's a standard out there on this is how you evaluate that particular material, and they don't tend to irradiate it before they sterilize it, and they don't irradiate it in the presence of oxygen. They do it in a nitrogen environment. So that's a specific example, but other examples that the FDA is well aware of and concerns themselves about a lot is anything that needs to be reused, because it's going to be cleaned over and over again. There's going to be detergents that are used on it. There might be some sort of bactericidal material used on it. It might be exposed to heat from an autoclave. those are the things they say, please repeat it. So I've even seen companies spend $250,000 just on their cleaning validation alone because their product was designed to be reused 100 times. So they had to redo their cleaning validation and sterilization validation 100 times. And the FDA came back with, oh, in your process, it says they can put this ultrasound lubricant on the part to improve the performance. You didn't use that, so redo everything. So here's another $250,000 expenditure because they left out that one ingredient, the lubricant for ultrasound, that might change the results of the soiling of the product. And of course, it didn't show any difference at all, but they don't, okay, so you proved that our concern is not a concern, but it could have worked out just the opposite. So we don't feel bad about making you spend an extra $250,000. You should have done that right from the start. So we see stuff like that. Anything that is going to be reused over and over again, anything that's going to be aged. And they also handle that with batteries where you have charge and discharge cycles. They want to see that kind of testing.
So that's probably a free advertisement for you, though you don't need it at this point, is great reason to get somebody in who's got a broad exposure to some of these things. I've had customers who have used all of that stuff. Yeah.
David?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Great discussion, Rob. I wanted to go back to Joe's question to you and I forget the question, but you said yesterday you had an FDA meeting, blah, blah. Is V&V testing, have your clients tried to use some of the V&V testing, particularly if they have sterilized product as 0-time cohorts or something? Or that makes sense?
We're always presenting verification and validation data. The validation data is very limited. When we say V&V, validation is simulated use in an animal, simulated use on a cadaver, simulated use on like a usability study or a clinical study, which would be actual use. That's the validation side. Verification is most of what people call validation. So software validation is really verification. Sterilization validation is really verification. So most of your testing that you're dealing with the FDA is verification testing, and you submit non-clinical bench testing plans to the FDA and protocols and ask them specific questions about it. It used to be you would say, do we have to do shelf life testing? And they would tell you, yeah, make sure you do shelf life testing to this ASTM standard. Now, the expectation is we're only going to answer 4 topics, and we're only going to answer if you give us the protocols, and we're only going to answer if you ask specific questions about that protocol. So now we have to provide the non-clinical benchtop testing, the protocols for it, and we have to ask specific questions about it. So the level of knowledge of the people submitting pre-subs now has to be so much higher than it was in the past. We're not asking generic questions. We're not asking basic questions about guidance documents. Now we're asking, do you agree with our rationale for this sample size? Do you agree with this being the worst case scenario? Do you agree with this acceptance criteria that we've come up with? Those are the kinds of questions that we come up with now.
Right.
So they're more sophisticated questions. We're doing a lot more work up front, and we usually have done this before or talked to somebody who has, so we know what questions to ask, because the generic questions get you the same answer every time. This is a generic question, and we recommend you submit a full protocol in a supplement to this pre-sub, and then we'll answer your questions.
If I could, one add-on. Are you seeing clients being asked for real-time aging beyond the accelerated? That's what we usually submit. Are they being pushed for real-time data? No.
The only thing I have heard of recently where the FDA was asking for real-time aging on was a viral transfer media that was going to be used for detecting whether you have COVID or RSV or something like that. And it's the media tubes that are being used to culture the viruses. They want that real-time aged.
Sure.
And I don't know for certain, but I think it's because they've found that the accelerated aging doesn't give them representative data.
Yep. All right. Thanks.
With 10 minutes to go, do you have another presentation idea for us?
I would say that in the last few months, we've done quite a few breakthrough submissions and a step submission, actually a couple step submissions. We just got a step submission that was approved. For those of you that haven't heard of step, if your product is a new and innovative device and it's an improvement, but it's not considered a breakthrough, it doesn't meet that criteria. That's a very narrow set of criteria. So it's a better product. It's new and improved, but it's not what the FDA calls a breakthrough. There's another program called the STEP program. And that program, it's essentially the same information that you present to the FDA in your application, and it's the same timeline, but what it gets you is, instead of asking a question to the FDA and waiting 75 days, now you can ask questions about one topic instead of 4, and you can get your answer in 45 days. And we've seen it even faster than that. So the STEP program is allowing companies to do what they call sprints and get faster answers on specific topics in sequence. So if the first testing you need to get underway is biocompatibility and you need a question answered from the FDA right away, you can set up a quick informal meeting with the FDA or a formal sprint meeting with the FDA, and you can get your answer and start that testing early. So your whole entire testing program can be accelerated much faster with these sprints, because you don't have to wait 75 days for every single meeting with the FDA, and that really helps out a lot. But it's really not hard to submit the steps, but I think most people are approaching it. I want breakthroughs so I can get some sort of better outcome with reimbursement, but nobody's thinking about the advantages of these sprints in helping them get through their development process and verification testing faster.
Thank you. All right. Open mic. Anyone have any regulatory question they want to throw at Rob? I'll start with, what do you want your topic at 10X to be?
I have no idea yet, but somebody else can suggest one.
Okay, what would you like to see Rob do a song and dance about live for your entertainment?
I'd love to see the song and dance.
I think I could handle the song part, but it wouldn't be as good as Joe's. It would be louder probably, but not
I'd be
as
willing to harmonize with you.
There you go.
So we just need 2 more parts. Do we have any other singers in the audience?
Don't look at me.
Nicholas, is Sophia a singer? Can't hear you.
Somebody put in a
Not
question.
Sophia.
Not the kind of singer that you would admire.
I think we would admire. Is she awake?
Not right now. They're at grandparents' house.
Oh,
Yeah.
tell us about your new baby.
She's just adorable. Just amazing. I mean, we think about all
You sound like a first-time dad, but this is not your first go-around.
It's my second girl, and it just it gives you new life every time. I don't know. I just can't believe how perfectly they come out of the oven. Just amazing. They're just put together, and just it's beautiful.
We had to assemble my children, so maybe it's the mom.
I can bring my guitar.
Okay. Does anyone else have some hidden talents that they'd like to share with us? Sean Smith, surely you do.
No, but I had sent a message to Rob and said, what are there any other big surprises in eSTAR 5.0 that, besides cybersecurity, big changes that manufacturers need to prepare for? I'd love to hear what he has to say about that.
I just put in the chat a hyperlink. I actually wrote a blog about it already. So that was posted on December 19th, so it's fairly new. One of the things that's new in there is they opened it up for PMAs. So it used to be you couldn't submit PMAs the same way that you could at 510K. Now they're opening it up for a traditional PMA can be submitted using the eSTAR, and they've enabled that functionality. So that's a big game changer for anybody that's thinking about doing PMAs. It changes how you would submit it completely. It also shows you that in the PMA world, they're looking for a lot more quality system data. None of those requirements are enabled for a 510K or a de novo. But as soon as you click on PMA, all those functions suddenly become active, and they're asking you to upload your quality system information. So that's one area that's completely new. Another thing that's in there after that is Health Canada is conducting a pilot. So they've got some more information related to Health Canada. So there've been some updates there. But Health Canada has now got 10 companies that are actively participating. And I think when 5.0 is official, which is February, I have a feeling we might see some new announcements about the Health Canada eSTAR pilot. Maybe even some changes to the format.
Speaking of which, did you see the alert this morning? There was an alert this morning from the Wall Street Journal that Florida's been allowed by the FDA to import products from Canada. Did you see that?
Pharmaceutical.
I haven't read the article. I just saw the alert on my phone, but I don't know what that means.
That means I'm surprised that pharma stocks aren't tanking today.
Yeah.
One more question, for Rob.
Sean?
One more question for Rob. QMSR, big deal, not a big deal? Yay, nay? What are we going to see this year?
It's going to be released. It's going to be released later than anybody is guessing. Mary Votter is one of my employees. She's actually was hired by AAMI to rewrite the compendium document. Now the FDA is going to be co-writing it with AAMI's consultants, and they are going to be making a bunch of modifications for what's going to be the new QSR. So that's totally different. I would say that the FDA is going to not require, they've already said they won't require certification for anybody. So it's voluntary, but you will have to comply with 1345. But we will see that announcement come soon, but it's not out yet.
Say, Rob, sorry, Joe. Rob, have you heard any activity on eSTAR for PMA? Do you have any? I know it's new, but kind of. I was wondering about.
I haven't seen anybody do it, but they only have like 25 of them come out a year.
Right.
Oh.
I mean, yeah. I didn't know. I haven't looked, but I didn't know if file size had been enlarged for the eSTAR of a PMA, things like that, or attachments. I don't know.
The file size is when they launched the eSTAR, they made it for larger file sizes, so it can definitely handle that. If you had to upload things that were even larger than they'll allow, which is about a 1 gigabyte limit, then what you would do is you would upload those as separate e-copies, or you would do it as additional information. So you can have an eSTAR that has additional information request, and you would just attach the documents that way. But most people would just do it as an e-copy upload.
Yeah, thanks.
Next week, Ross Meisner is going to talk about some of his lessons learned marketing and commercialization when he was back at Medtronic. And the week after that, Andre's friend Randy is coming back, and he's going to talk to us about how some of the issues that Joe Chiani and Massimo are facing in their suit with Apple. I'll see if I can get Dr. Dave Albert to join us on that call as well. He will be, by the way, returning to 10X, as will Anthony Chang, because AI, and Mauricio is returning as well. And I have a call with Gunter later today. So all your fan favorites will be there. And I'm already looking forward to it, May 1st and 2nd in Newport Beach. Rob, I'm going to call you right after this call. And then Sean, would you get in touch with me in, say, a half hour? Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you next week. Oh, Mari, you have your hand raised real quick?
Quick note, I'm actually buying one of the Alive Core products today for my mom, who's been having trouble with atrial fib. So we're going to give her a little home monitor to watch things.
Well, that's good news and bad news.
Yeah, well, she's doing fine.
Good. Okay.
But it's nice to have those products available.
Yes, it is. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.